My sister's husband confessed to my wife that he'd fallen for her. This revelation triggered a series of awful revelations within our family. Just yesterday, unexpectedly, my brother-in-law invited my wife to lunch. He mentioned he had something important to discuss with her. When my wife shared this with me, she appeared confused but not too worried. Could it be about my sister? She wondered, with a slight frown. Maybe they're going through a rough patch, and he's looking for a female perspective. The situation struck me as strange. My brother-in-law had never contacted my wife like this previously, though he often messaged her and other family members about everyday stuff, so I brushed it off. After all, we were a tight family, and it wasn't rare for us to lend a hand during difficult times. Go see what's up, I told her, shaking off my slight discomfort. My wife decided to meet him at a nearby cafe the following day. The next day, while getting ready, she brought up the lunch again. I'm still clueless about this, she admitted, a touch of anxiety in her voice. I tried to reassure her, suggesting it was likely nothing major. Just hear him out, and if it's something we need to address, we'll tackle it together, I said. It's a bustling cafe, packed with the regular lunch crowd, and my wife feels somewhat relieved, being in such an open space. She gets there a little early, grabbing a table by the window, where she can watch people come and go. He shows up shortly after, appearing more anxious than she's ever witnessed. They exchange small talk, chatting about jobs and the children for a bit. However, right after their meals arrive, he inhales deeply and spills what he actually came to say. He begins by praising her, commenting on how gorgeous she is. Initially, she assumes he's simply being kind, but he continues. He expresses how she's consistently brightened his life, how she evokes emotions he's never experienced. It was love at first sight, he declares, his voice a bit shaky. I've adored you from the first time I saw you. If you were with me, I'd treat you like royalty. I'd give you everything you've ever wanted. My wife is shocked. She gazes at him, struggling to grasp what she's hearing. This guy, my brother-in-law, married to my sister and a father to their 2 children, is opening his heart to her. He really piles it on, making extravagant promises about how much better life would be if they were a couple. He continues, revealing he's harbored these feelings for a long time, admiring her from a distance, increasingly convinced they're destined to be together. She attempts to cut in, to inform him he's terribly mistaken, but he talks over her, as though he's memorized this entire speech. Keep in mind, this guy has always had a cordial relationship with my wife. Our families hang out often since we're so close. He's always been the fun uncle to our kids, present at every family cookout, every festive dinner. He does message my wife regularly, but it's always about ordinary things, kid schedules, family gatherings, and so on. Nothing suggestive, nothing that would raise any red flags. In fact, he messages and calls my mom too. They have a good connection, and none of us ever suspected anything. To us, he's always seemed like a decent person, someone we completely trusted. So, hearing my wife relay this was like taking a blow to the stomach. My wife cuts him off. She rises, her chair making a loud noise against the floor, and exits. She's visibly upset as she calls me, recounting everything that occurred. As she's speaking to me, his texts start coming in. First, they're apologies. He claims he didn't mean it, that it's merely infatuation. He's sorry for upsetting her. But the damage is already done. She leaves her job early to come home and discuss this with me, her phone buzzing non-stop with his calls and texts. I suggest she answer one of his calls, put him on speaker so I can listen. He's sobbing, pleading with her not to inform my sister. He repeats that it was a blunder, that he misread things, that he believed she reciprocated his feelings. Apparently, during our recent get-together, he thought my wife was being flirty, that they shared a moment alone in our kitchen where he sensed a bond. My wife can be a real jokester, and I guess I can understand how that could be misconstrued as flirting, but this is far beyond anything we could have foreseen. He inquires if she told me, and I respond affirmatively, since I'm on speaker. Then he starts pleading with me too, begging us to keep this confidential. This continued for some time, him pleading and us just taking it in. My primary concern was whether he'd been unfaithful to my sister previously. He insisted he hadn't, swearing on his children's lives that it was only my wife. He said I should appreciate that it was her, exclusively her. At that moment, I was through with listening. I informed him I wouldn't act tonight and that I'd contact him tomorrow. Now we're stuck with this predicament, unsure of our next move. My wife suggests we go over there immediately and inform my sister, but the thought of ruining my sister's family is agonizing. Contemplating the impact on my nieces makes me nauseous. I know the ethical action is to tell my sister, but I'm also considering my wife. It's not her doing, but there's bound to be bitterness from my family. Even if my sister doesn't leave him and they work things out, I can't envision us ever being together as we were previously, if ever. This entire situation could rip my family apart. I don't care about him. He attempted to wreck my family, but I do care about everyone else. Update. So everyone who advised me last night that I shouldn't delay telling my sister was absolutely correct. Shortly after midnight, I received a call from my sister. She sounded distressed and said she needed to share something with me. My heart dropped as she disclosed that her husband, my brother-in-law, had come to her in tears, alleging my wife had attempted to initiate an affair with him. He fabricated a story where my wife was the one who started it, attempting to place all the blame on her. I could barely comprehend what I was hearing. I promptly told my sister that wasn't true and assured her I'd be right there. This matter demanded a face-to-face discussion, not a phone call. I hung up and, feeling a sense of urgency, contacted my parents. I woke them up, explaining the situation in concise sentences. My father was enraged. My mother sounded stunned but determined. They agreed to go to my sister's place to watch her children, providing the support she'd desperately require. Next, I phoned my younger brother. He answered groggily, confusion turning to concern as I updated him. He vowed to come to our house and stay with our children, guaranteeing they wouldn't be alone during this chaos. His composed, reliable presence would be a source of comfort. Meanwhile, my wife was already packing, her face ashen. She was apprehensive about the confrontation but recognized its necessity. We departed in haste, the drive to my sister's feeling unusually prolonged. The quiet in the car was oppressive, both of us absorbed in our own thoughts. Upon arrival, the scene was even more fraught than I'd anticipated. My sister is on the front porch with my brother-in-law when we show up. He appears defeated, eyes lowered, his posture conveying his loss. He's aware we possess the texts and voicemails, the irrefutable evidence of his deceit. I genuinely don't know what he aimed to achieve by contacting my sister late at night with his falsehoods. Perhaps he believed he could preempt the story, manipulate the narrative to save himself, but it was a pointless endeavor. As we approach them, the tension is almost tangible. My wife is shaking, her face a blend of restrained fury and pain. She hands my sister her phone silently. My sister accepts it, her hands firm but her eyes reflecting a combination of rage and anguish. She reviews the texts, her expression growing sterner with each one. Then she listens to the voicemails, the conclusive proof of his declarations and her rejections. Before she can react, my brother-in-law begins weeping. This is a man who confronts danger regularly without hesitation. Witnessing him like this, shattered and exposed, is unsettling. His sobs are profound and raw, filled with remorse and apprehension. It's an almost unbelievable scene, a robust firefighter brought to his knees by his own misdeeds. My sister's expression remains stoic, a facade of firm resolve. She's always been resilient, but currently, she's unwavering. She waits for him to conclude, her quiet more impactful than any dialogue. When he finally calms, still catching his breath from the remnants of his sobs, she speaks. "Pack your things and leave," she commands, her voice frigid and distinct. "I can't bear to see you." He attempts to reason, to justify his actions, but she remains unmoved. "Stop," she interjects sharply, silencing him. "There's nothing you can say to improve this." She turns from him, approaches my wife, and embraces her. It's a display of unity between them, a small solace amidst this ordeal. They've been companions since their university days, and the depth of their connection is clear. It's a comfort to observe that, despite everything, they're supporting each other. This leaves me with my brother-in-law. He's a complete mess, his face flushed and puffy from crying, his shoulders drooping. He gazes at me, his eyes seeking some form of comprehension or absolution, but I offer none. He tries to speak, his voice strained, but I interrupt. "You must go," I state firmly. "This is your doing. You must face the repercussions." He nods, acknowledging defeat, and gradually heads inside to gather his belongings. My sister remains with my wife, the two conversing softly, relying on each other for strength. The remainder of the night is a haze of discussions and arrangements. We all support my sister, assisting her in determining her next steps, how to shield her children from the consequences. My sister starts to question my wife, seeking to comprehend why her husband believed any of this could possibly succeed. He must have possessed some rationale to think she shared his sentiments. My sister maintains there were no problems in their marriage, everything had been ordinary. My wife is now in tears, crying as she endeavors to rationalize the events. "There's nothing you haven't witnessed," she says, her voice unsteady. She hands my sister her phone once more, and together they meticulously examine every text message exchanged over the past 2 years. They scrutinize each one, searching for any indication of inappropriate conduct, but there's nothing. My wife was simply being genuine. She possesses a lively disposition, always joking and engaging in playful banter. It's part of what makes her so endearing and easy to be around. My brother-in-law shares a similar humorous nature, and they've always teased each other in a casual, innocent manner. She interacts similarly with my mother and my younger brother. It's simply her way of connecting with people. The sole occurrence my wife can recall that might have been misinterpreted took place last weekend. She recounts it, attempting to identify where things went awry. They were all gathered at our home, and she and my brother-in-law both reached for the refrigerator simultaneously. They playfully competed to see who would get there first, chuckling as they did so. He allowed her to win, but then he encircled her waist to retrieve a beverage, moving his hand deliberately. She concedes that, in that instant, his action felt slightly improper. It was a transient sensation, and she dismissed it, not wanting to escalate it. She now contemplates whether her silence provided him with some misguided encouragement. My sister listens attentively, her expression softening. She doesn't attribute any blame to my wife. She knows her sufficiently well to grasp that her playful demeanor isn't an invitation for anything further. "It's not your fault," she reassures her, and my wife nods, although the remorse persists. As they conclude reviewing the messages, it's evident there was never any reciprocal fondness, no concealed cues or clandestine flirtations. My wife was simply being herself, and my brother-in-law misconstrued it, distorting it into something it wasn't. The understanding that this misinterpretation has caused so much suffering is almost unbearable, but at least, for the present, my sister's trust in my wife remains unbroken. Subsequently, my sister begins examining his MacBook to uncover anything else she's unaware of. She's furious and agitated at this stage, her hands trembling as she inputs the password. She correctly guesses it on the third attempt, gaining access. Taking a deep breath, she commences searching through his files, seeking anything that might illuminate this distressing situation. It doesn't take long before she discovers something alarming. There, concealed within a folder labeled innocuously, are numerous photographs of my wife. They span several years, and what's more disturbing is that they're consistently isolated shots, solely of her, never within group settings or spontaneous family gatherings. My sister clicks through them, her fury transforming into a chilling, escalating dread. One collection of images is particularly striking. A few years prior, we embarked on a couple's excursion to the Caribbean. It was an infrequent vacation without the children, and my wife, feeling more at ease in the adults-only setting, had donned a bikini. She typically doesn't, favoring more conservative swimwear, but on this occasion, she had felt sufficiently comfortable. There were approximately 50 photographs of her in that bikini, each captured without her awareness. My sister's face grows pale as she scrolls through them. It's apparent he's been covertly taking these pictures for years, accumulating them compulsively. The realization that he's been nurturing this fixation, concealing it during family events, sends a chill down her spine. Does this now warrant a restraining order? She inquires aloud, her voice hushed. This has taken a sinister turn, far exceeding anything any of us had envisioned. The line between inappropriate and blatantly unsettling has been crossed. She summons us, displaying the images. My wife gasps, her hand covering her mouth in disbelief. She had no inkling he was engaging in this, no suspicion of his obsession. My sister, her rage now moderated by a profound sense of betrayal, begins discussing subsequent actions. Legal recourse, safeguarding her children, and a restraining order are all possibilities that now require consideration. We're all stunned by this fresh revelation. The man we believed we knew, whom we trusted as a spouse, a father, and a brother-in-law, has exposed a facet of himself that's shadowy and alarming. It's no longer merely a matter of infatuation. It's something considerably more malevolent. Regrettably, the turmoil persists. My sister consented to converse with her husband last night, allowing him to provide his explanation. She was resolute in obtaining the complete narrative and chose to involve my wife directly to preclude any deception or partial truths. They arranged a FaceTime call with my wife, and I eavesdropped off camera, my heart pounding with a blend of resentment and apprehension. My sister, ever meticulous, recorded the entire exchange for safekeeping. As soon as the call commenced, the tension was unmistakable. My brother-in-law appeared drained, his eyes bloodshot and puffy from weeping. He initiated the conversation hesitantly, his voice quivering, but as he continued, the reality began to emerge, and the account unfolded in a manner none of us had fully foreseen. He acknowledged he's been fixated on my wife for years. It began the day I encountered her, he admitted, his voice scarcely audible. He proceeded to clarify that it was during one of those initial get-togethers where my sister, keen to introduce her new boyfriend to her companions, had brought him along. My wife and I were dating then, but he had met her prior to meeting me. Initially, he believed his sentiments were solely physical, an innocuous infatuation he could disregard. However, as time progressed and he spent more time in her presence, he understood it was more profound. He became engrossed in her character, her joviality, the manner in which she engaged with everyone surrounding her. He recounted instances where he found himself observing her, enthralled by her mere existence, even when she was simply being herself, lively and considerate. He elaborated on how he had attempted to stifle these emotions, persuading himself they were benign. Yet, over time, his fixation intensified. He began devising methods to be near her more frequently, offering assistance with family functions, fabricating pretexts to text her regarding insignificant matters. It was a gradual, insidious progression that ultimately culminated in him feeling impelled to divulge his affections, deceiving himself into supposing she might reciprocate. My sister listened, her expression a combination of restrained fury and desolation. She didn't interrupt, allowing him to self-destruct with each utterance. My wife, conversely, was visibly distressed. Hearing the duration of this, the intensity of his obsession, was almost overwhelming for her. Upon his conclusion, a weighty silence ensued. My sister finally spoke, her voice glacial and deliberate. "What led you to assume that my wife would abandon me for you?" she inquired, her gaze piercing his. He faltered, striving to articulate the appropriate response. He alluded to the purported mutual attraction, the instances he had misconstrued as indications of her reciprocation. My wife and sister erupted at that juncture, their pent-up resentment and exasperation overflowing. There was considerable profanity, considerable shouting, the unrefined emotion of betrayal and anguish surfacing. My wife terminated the call, her hands trembling, her face ashen. She was apprehensive for me, for us, repeatedly assuring me the attraction was unilateral. I believed her. I always had. Even if she did find him physically appealing at some juncture, I knew she would never act upon it. She's unwavering about trust and fidelity, something she emphasized early in our relationship. This entire ordeal was a distorted illusion of my brother-in-law's, a perilous delusion that had nearly disintegrated our family. The tension that had been accumulating during the call finally detonated into a tempest of profanity and clamor. My wife's voice was a fusion of indignation and distress, while my sister's was resolute and unforgiving. The onslaught of emotions was overpowering, the atmosphere saturated with betrayal and incredulity. The phone call concluded abruptly when my wife, shaking and distraught, hung up because she was concerned for me. She turned to me, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "It was one-sided," she assured me, her voice trembling. "I never thought it wasn't," I replied, trying to soothe her. Even if she did find him physically attractive at some point, I knew she would never act on it. She's just not that type of person. Early on in our relationship, there was a moment that encapsulated her stance on trust and fidelity perfectly. I remember watching her one morning as she was dressing, admiring her without saying a word. She noticed, gave me a teasing smile and asked if I liked what I saw. But then her expression turned serious, almost cold. "Never fuck up," she said, her tone leaving no room for misunderstanding. "Or you'll never see this again." She meant every word. My wife is serious about trust. Once it's broken, it's almost impossible to mend. As I sat there, replaying the chaotic scene in my mind, I couldn't help but reflect on my brother-in-law. I knew he was a little cocky, always walking with a certain swagger, but my God, I never knew he thought so highly of himself to believe he could pull off something like this. His delusions of grandeur were staggering, completely detached from reality. I talked to my sister later on, once the initial shock had started to wear off and we could speak more calmly. She was resolute, determined to protect her children from the fallout of her husband's actions. She told me she would be contacting a lawyer first thing Monday morning, to see what steps she could take to limit his exposure to their kids. She wanted to ensure that they were shielded from as much of this mess as possible. "As far as I'm concerned, he's detached from reality," she said, her voice steely with resolve. Her concern was no longer about saving her marriage but about safeguarding her children and maintaining a semblance of stability for them. Anyway, my brother-in-law returned home yesterday, not because my sister wants him back but because she can't legally stop him. Despite the turmoil and the clear betrayal, he has the right to be in the house until the legal proceedings move forward. The atmosphere is tense and uncomfortable, filled with unspoken words and palpable resentment. They are done, and I think he realizes that now. There's a hollow look in his eyes, as if he understands that any hope he had of salvaging their marriage is gone. The lawyer tells my sister that since my brother-in-law's behavior over the past few days has been documented, there is a good chance she will be granted full custody of the kids. The texts, voicemails, and the disturbing cache of photos all paint a clear picture of his obsession and instability. He doesn't seem to even want to fight her on that. It's as if he knows he's lost everything and is too weary to put up a battle. My sister will be fine. She's stronger than she looks, and any love she had for him is gone. She moves through the house with a determined air, her focus now entirely on her children and their future. She doesn't seem to be broken up about it. Rather, she looks like someone who's finally seen the truth and is ready to move forward. The kids don't know what happened yet. They sense something is wrong. Kids always do. But they don't know the details. My brother-in-law was never around much anyway when the kids were home. He often slept at the fire station, pulling double shifts and overtime. His absence was a constant in their lives, a silent but ever-present gap that they had grown used to. But it is certain to be hard on them once they know what's going to happen. The stability of their home, the presence of both parents, even if it was fractured, will change. My sister is prepared for this. She's already spoken to a child psychologist to help them navigate the inevitable questions and emotions that will arise. She's ready to be both mother and father, to provide them with the love and support they'll need. As for my brother-in-law, he stays in the guest room, a silent figure in a house that no longer feels like his home. He seems resigned to his fate, going through the motions but devoid of any real fight. It's a sad, pitiful sight, but my sympathy is limited. Some of my friends have said that there must be more women, that someone as obsessive as my brother-in-law couldn't have fixated on just one person. But as far as we can tell, there hasn't been anyone else. It's really just the obsession with my wife. His fixation on her has been singular and intense, leaving no room for anyone else. After everything came to light, my wife blocked his phone number, trying to create some distance and protect herself from his unwanted advances. But on the same night he returned home, he sent my wife an email from an account he had just made. It started with a seemingly sincere apology, but it quickly took a turn into something much darker. He began by saying he never got to finish at the restaurant that day, implying there was more he needed to confess. Then he launched into paragraphs and paragraphs about all the things he loves about my wife. He detailed the desperation he felt, the overwhelming emotions that had driven him to act so irrationally. He recounted every little detail he admired about her. Her smile, her laugh, the way she interacted with others. It was unsettling, to say the least, to see his obsession laid out so starkly. He mentioned their supposed mutual attraction again, insisting that there was a palpable sexual tension between them that he had always felt. He was delusional, mistaking her friendly, playful nature for something more. He painted a picture of a connection that existed only in his mind, a fantasy that he had convinced himself was real. The email ended with a rather large section about me. Let's just say I didn't know he had such a low opinion of me. He was quite certain that I was not satisfying my wife properly. He criticized everything from my appearance to my demeanor, implying that I was somehow unworthy of her. His words were meant to undermine me, to sow seeds of doubt and insecurity. Reading the email was a gut punch. It was clear that his obsession with my wife had twisted his perceptions and fueled his disdain for me. He saw me as an obstacle, someone unworthy of the woman he had placed on a pedestal. But instead of feeling threatened, it only solidified my resolve to protect my wife and my family from his delusions. We forwarded the email to my sister and her lawyer. It was more evidence of his unstable state of mind, another piece of the puzzle that showed just how far gone he was. This email, with its mix of apology, obsession, and vitriol, might be enough to get him removed from the house permanently. For now, my wife and I are taking it one day at a time. The support from our friends and family has been invaluable, helping us navigate this surreal and painful situation. Finally, my wife isn't doing great, but she is improving each day. She does feel guilty for being too comfortable around my brother-in-law. Normally, she is very careful about setting boundaries with other men, in case it may draw unwanted attention. However, she felt safe around my brother-in-law because he was family, and she never thought he would cross any lines. Fortunately, she and my sister are on good terms, and there doesn't seem to be any resentment, which is a relief. We will all be okay, but it will take time. Thank you to everyone who commented and offered their support. My primary concern throughout this was my sister and her children. The impact of my brother-in-law's actions on their lives is immense. Ensuring their protection and emotional well-being became our priority. Children, especially, need shielding from such toxic situations to maintain their sense of security and normalcy. When faced with such a situation, it's essential to act quickly and decisively. We didn't hesitate to gather evidence, confront the issue, and involve legal help to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone involved. Procrastination or denial could have led to further harm. What are your thoughts on this whole mess? Feel free to leave your opinions below.